Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Kitsune. Serving as the divine messengers of Inari, Japan's Shinto deity of rice, fertility, and economic abundance. Kitsune, the supernatural fox spirits at the heart of Japanese folklore, occupy a position no other creature in world mythology quite replicates. They are simultaneously the tricksters who seduce and deceive, the celestial intermediaries who carry human prayers to the gods, and the guardians of the single commodity upon which Japan's entire feudal economy was built. In a civilization where a lord's wealth was measured not in gold coins, but in koku, the volume of rice, his lands could produce in a year the favor of a kitsune was not a spiritual abstraction. It was the difference between a full granary and a famine winter. The kitsune's supernatural power grows in direct proportion to its age. Each century of life produces an additional tail, and the most ancient and most powerful kitsune possess 9 tails cubi gleaming silver or gold, marking a creature that has accumulated 1,000 years of wisdom and magical force. 9-tailed kitsune were considered celestial beings of the highest order, capable of entering heaven itself, and their presence near a rice field or a merchant's warehouse was interpreted as a divine endorsement of that community's prosperity. The tail count was not decorative, it was a precise index of supernatural capital. Inari shrines form the largest single shrine network in all of Japan, over 30,000 of them, ranging from modest roadside cairns to the grand Fushimi Inari Taisha in Kyoto, whose tunnel of 10,000 vermilion torii gates climbs Mount Inari and draws 3 million visitors every year. At every one of these shrines, stone kitsune stand guard in pairs, one carrying a scroll for wisdom, one carrying a jewel for material wealth. Merchants, farmers, and samurai alike stopped at Inari markers before ventures that determined their livelihood, because in Japan's feudal economy, every form of income traced ultimately back to rice, and the rice answered to the fox. The Kitsunebai foxfire is among the kitsune's most tangible supernatural manifestations. Blue-white flames that appear in the darkness of rice paddies and mountain paths, floating just above the ground without burning what they touch. Rural communities across Japan interpreted these lights as kitsune navigating between the human world and Inari's domain, carrying accumulated prayers upward and returning with blessings. The appearance of kitsunebi near a struggling farm was read as a sign of divine attention, that the fields had been noticed, that intervention was imminent. The Kitsune Meiobo tales appear across centuries of Japanese literature with a consistent economic signature. A mortal man, often a poor farmer or struggling craftsman, encounters an unusually beautiful woman under circumstances that later reveal her to be a kitsune in human form. They marry. Children are born. And in every version of this story, the man's fortunes change dramatically. His harvests grow inexplicably large, his business prospers without explanation, his standing in the community rises without visible effort. The foxwife does not manipulate events through obvious magic. She inhabits the household, and abundance follows. When she is eventually discovered, often by catching the reflection of her tail in still water, she disappears. But the prosperity she established tends to persist, encoded in the half-fox children she leaves behind. Modern Inari devotion has not dimmed in the age of corporate finance. The Tokyo Stock Exchange maintains an Inari shrine on its premises. Major Japanese corporations make formal offerings at Fushimi Inari before quarterly earnings seasons. The ritual continues because the logic never changed. In a civilization built on rice, the creature that governed the harvest was always the wealthiest supernatural patron available. The kitsune managed the supply chain of abundance itself. Number 2. The Tanuki. Where the kitsune carries the elegance of a divine appointment, the tanuki carries a sake bottle, wears an oversized straw hat, and grins with the particular contentment of a creature that has figured out a very good trick. Based on the real raccoon dog Nyctereutes procyonoides, a fox-like canid native to East Asia, the tanuki is Japan's other great shape-shifting yokai, and where the kitsune speaks of celestial prosperity, the tanuki speaks the earthier language of commerce, goodwill, and the financial opportunities available to those willing to be somewhat ridiculous. Its domain is not the sacred shrine, but the roadside restaurant, the sake shop, the market stall, the ordinary engine of daily economic life. The ceramic tanuki statue, produced most famously in the kilns of Shigaraki in Shiga Prefecture since the Edo period, encodes an entire philosophy of wealth into a single rotund ceramic figure. The wide-brimmed straw hat offers protection from misfortune and unexpected hardship. The sake bottle represents virtue and generosity in dealings. The ledger tucked under one arm signifies trustworthiness with accounts. The enormous belly rubbed before entering negotiations symbolizes bold, unhurried decision-making. The promissory note held in one paw represents trust and credit, the invisible currency that makes all commerce possible. The friendly face radiates the warmth that keeps customers returning. And the large, prominent scrotum depicted without embarrassment across centuries of Tanuki art represents financial luck and the extraordinary capacity of a modest investment to expand into something significant. 8 virtues encoded in one cheerfully indecent ceramic figure, watching over the financial life of the shop with benevolent amusement. The Bunboku Chagama is the Tanuki's defining prosperity tale, and it operates with a directness unusual in Japanese folklore. A Tanuki, injured and captured by a hunter, is purchased by a kind-hearted pawnbroker who nurses it back to health. In gratitude, the Tanuki transforms into a perfectly ordinary iron teapot, a chagama, and tells the pawnbroker to sell it. The pawnbroker sells the teapot to a temple. At night, the Tanuki half-transforms, extending its head and legs from the iron body, and performs acrobatic feats that delight onlookers. Word spreads. Crowds gather. The pawnbroker arranges exhibitions. His modest shop becomes prosperous. His name spreads across the district, and the Tanuki eventually returns to the wild with its debt of kindness discharged. The prosperity it generated stays. The transformation mechanics distinguish the Tanuki from the Kitsune in philosophically important ways. Kitsune transformations are flawless and undetectable. Tanuki transformations are enthusiastic but imperfect, a monk whose tail is visible beneath his robes, a traveling merchant whose ears twitch at unexpected sounds. This imperfection is not a flaw in the mythology. It implies that the prosperity the Tanuki represents rewards human perceptiveness. The merchant who spots the disguise and plays along anyway, extending courtesy to the creature's effort, is the one rewarded. Confronting the deception breaks the relationship, and the luck departs with the creature. In Edo period craft culture, goldsmiths wrapped gold leaf around Tanuki hide for hammering, believing the material's supernatural elasticity extended a single piece of gold into sheets thin enough to gild a temple. The phrase kin, no Tanuki, golden Tanuki, entered merchant slang as shorthand for a small investment that returned disproportionate wealth. Tanuki statues still stand at entrances of restaurants, banks, and shops across Japan, polished regularly, sake bottles refilled on auspicious days, because a prosperity spirit that goes untended is a prosperity spirit that moves on. Number 3. The leprechaun. The sound that reveals a leprechaun is not rustling cloth or glinting gold, it is the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a tiny hammer on a smaller shoe. In the original Irish tradition, the leprechaun is first and foremost a cobbler. The fairy craftsman who repairs the shoes of the AUS see the fairy people, and who has, over centuries of industrious solitary labor, accumulated a fortune he keeps in a crock buried at the rainbow's end. He is compact, standing between half a meter and a meter tall, depending on the account, with sharp eyes and the particular expression of a creature that knows a great deal and intends to share none of it. He does not wear green. The original leprechaun of Irish oral tradition wears a red coat with silver buttons, and the green version is a Victorian-era invention born from mass printing and sentimental nationalism. The red one is considerably craftier. The word derives from Old Irish Lú Chorpan small body, first appearing in medieval manuscripts, as a designation for small supernatural beings associated with hidden treasure and craft trades. The leprechaun is classified within the EAUSC tradition as a solitary fairy, distinct from the communal fairy courts that populate most European supernatural taxonomy. He works alone, accumulates alone, and is protected by a rule that exists only in fairy logic. A human who catches him and holds his gaze without looking away is owed either the location of his gold or 3 wishes in its place. The moment the human's gaze breaks, and every technique in the leprechaun's repertoire is devoted to engineering that moment, the obligation dissolves, and so does the creature. The gold at the rainbow's end is not a whimsical Victorian invention. In pre-Christian Irish belief, rainbows were understood to terminate at ancient burial mounds raths, or ring forts that dotted the Irish landscape in their thousands. These ring forts were, in many documented cases, repositories of genuine treasure. Bronze Age hoards, Viking silver caches, medieval coin deposits buried during conflict and never reclaimed. The association between leprechaun sightings and ringfort locations persisted through the 17th and 18th centuries, with farmers discovering genuine silver and bronze artifacts after following reports of leprechaun activity to specific mounds. The creature was, in this reading, a folkloric memory of where real wealth had been hidden. The three-wish mechanic in documented Irish tradition is a lesson in the dangers of imprecise financial planning. Folklore accounts of captured leprechauns are dense with men who wished for gold and received technically compliant but practically worthless fulfillments: a field of grain that rotted before harvest, a house filled with coins that dissolved at dawn. The successful extractions consistently involve individuals who bypass the three-wish structure entirely, demanding instead that the leprechaun lead them directly to his buried crock, a demand the creature is obligated to honor if the gaze holds. That gold stays gold after sunrise. That is the detail the folklore consistently confirms, and the only form of leprechaun wealth extraction that the tradition actually endorses. The Clurichaun, the leprechaun's drunken closest relative, sometimes classified as the same being in a different mood, haunts wine cellars and breweries, drinking freely from the best stock. A household with a resident Clurichaun never runs short of wine, provided the family tolerates his habits without confrontation. Irish estate accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries describe premium vintages appearing unexplained in locked cellars, gifts from the creature for households that maintained the courtesy of pretending not to notice him. The leprechaun's entire wealth mythology operates on this principle. Fortune flows toward those perceptive enough to find it and gracious enough not to scare it away. Number 4. The Long. To call the Long a dragon in the Western sense is to mistake a hospital for a battlefield. Both contain urgent human activity and the possibility of catastrophic loss, but the logic and purpose are entirely different. The Long of Chinese mythology is not a destroyer of cities or a hoarder of maiden-guarded gold. It is the celestial engine of agricultural prosperity, the atmospheric being whose moods determine whether rivers run full or dry, whether monsoon rains arrive in time to save a harvest or fail to arrive at all. In a civilization built along floodplain rivers and sustained by rice and grain paddies, requiring precise rainfall at precise intervals, the Long was not a creature of legend. It was the operating mechanism of the economy. The physical form is a deliberate composite of 9 animals, each selected for its symbolic weight. Camel head for endurance, deer antlers for longevity and rank, rabbit eyes for clarity. Carp scales, 81 of them, 9 times 9, the most auspicious configuration in Chinese numerology, covering a sinuous body of enormous length. Eagle claws for authority, tiger paws for courage, ox ears for the wisdom to hear what matters, a snake's flexible belly, a clam's lustrous underside for the capacity to generate pearl-like value from the sea. Every feature was drawn from an animal Chinese civilization considered prosperous or powerful, and the dragon synthesized all 9 into a single form. The composite anatomy was not artistic indulgence. It was theological precision, encoding prosperity from 9 directions into one living body. The dragon pearl Mingju makes the Long's wealth-generating function visible. Depicted as a luminous sphere carried in the creature's claws or pursued through roiling clouds, the pearl represents distilled moonlight, wisdom, and productive capacity. Classical texts describe the Mingju as capable of multiplying grain. A handful of rice left overnight beside a dragon pearl becomes a granary full by morning. Dragon kings kept their most powerful pearls within underwater palaces, and the gifting of a Mingju to a mortal was the folkloric mechanism by which entire dynasties rose from nothing to imperial command. The 4 dragon kings Long Wang governed the 4 seas, and by extension, all precipitation on Earth. Together they operated a supernatural water management bureaucracy that received petitions from drought-stricken communities with the same procedural gravity as communications between earthly courts. Chinese emperors did not merely pray for rain, they sent formal diplomatic correspondence to the dragon kings, submitted through the ritual burning of paper documents. When rain arrived in time to save the harvest, formal gratitude was dispatched through the same ceremonial channels. The Long was not worshipped out of awe alone. It was engaged as a peer in the business of running a civilization. The Dragon Boat Festival Duanwujai, held on the 5th day of the 5th lunar month, and now recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage, originated as a dragon appeasement ceremony along China's great rivers, timed to coincide with peak flood risk. Dragon-proud boats raced across the water, while drums beat continuously, satisfying the dragon's appetite for competition and sound. Rice dumplings wrapped in bamboo leaves zongzi were thrown into rivers as direct offerings. The modern festival retains both the boats and the dumplings. The original dragon prosperity rationale has been overlaid with a patriotic narrative about the poet Qian, but the riverain offering structure persists unchanged. In contemporary China and throughout the Chinese diaspora, dragon energy continues to shape real estate economics. Hong Kong property developers commission feng shui consultants to identify Long Mai dragon veins, the underground currents of dragon energy that determine a site's wealth potential before breaking ground. The Bank of China Tower in Hong Kong was deliberately designed to channel dragon energy from Victoria Harbor. The Long has not retired from the wealth management business. It simply no longer needs clouds to make its presence felt. Number 5. The Pixiu. The Pixiu has an appetite and no way to satisfy it, and in Chinese prosperity mythology, this is the ideal design for a supernatural financial instrument. A chimeric creature documented in Han Dynasty texts, the Pixiu carries a dragon's head, a lion's armored body, eagle wings scaled in overlapping plates, and a single curved horn above its eyes. It roams heaven and earth consuming gold, silver, and precious gemstones in quantities that would bankrupt any mortal treasury. It cannot stop eating because it never empties. The Jade Emperor ensured that personally, in a moment of divine fury that shaped Chinese wealth symbolism for 2,000 years. The Pixiu ate freely from the treasuries of heaven until it consumed enough sacred gold to disturb even celestial accounting, and then relieved itself, at considerable length, on the floor of the Jade Emperor's throne room. The Emperor struck the creature's rear with his imperial palm and sealed its anus with divine authority, declaring that from that moment forward the Pixiu would eat endlessly and release nothing. Cursed and perfected in the same gesture, the Pixiu became a machine that can only receive, never lose, its hunger driving it across every corner of existence in permanent search of precious material. The two genders encode a specific financial philosophy. Male Pixiu Tianwei draw wealth inward from the outside world, pulling financial opportunity toward their owner through the force of their appetite. Female Pixiu retain whatever wealth arrives, preventing it from escaping through misfortune, bad judgment, or hostile supernatural interference. Feng Shui practice requires both. One facing outward to eat incoming wealth, one positioned inward to hold what has already been gathered. They must never face mirrors, which cause them to consume their own reflection and return what they have collected. They must never face bedrooms, where their restless hunger disturbs sleep and health. Two Pixiu must never face each other, lest they compete and cancel out their respective functions. The golden thread bracelet, a Pixiu charm, worn on the left wrist, reflects a precise anatomical logic from traditional Chinese medicine. The left hand is the wealth-receiving hand, connected through meridian pathways to the governing functions of the heart. A Pixiu worn on this wrist faces outward into the world, consuming incoming financial opportunity and directing accumulated wealth through the meridian into the wearer's fortune. The charm requires periodic cleansing placed in running water or set in moonlight to clear the non-financial energies the creature ingests alongside gold and silver, since an indiscriminate Pixiu is an inefficient one. In Macau, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia, Pixiu culture operates at industrial scale. Casino floors display Pixiu statues at their entrances and in high roller rooms, where the creature's insatiable appetite is expected to align with the house's interests. The Pixiu jewelry market across East and Southeast Asia generates hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Gold pendants, jade carvings, obsidian phone charms, making the Pixiu one of the most economically active mythological figures in the contemporary world, its mythology sustaining an industry, while the industry sustains the mythology. The Pixiu does not promise abundance through generosity or divine favor. It promises abundance through accumulation, the simple, implacable logic of a creature that never stops consuming and never releases what it holds. In the cosmology of Chinese prosperity mythology, this is not greed. It is engineering. Number 6. The Naga. Beneath every river, every mineral seam, every underground aquifer, every vein of ore running through stone in the mythological geography of South and Southeast Asia, a Naga is watching. Sanskrit Naga means simply serpent or cobra, and the range of beings this single word encompasses stretches from fully serpentine river deities to exquisitely beautiful beings with human torsos crowned by multiple cobra heads fanning out in jeweled hoods, wearing royal gold and ruling underground kingdoms of incomprehensible richness. The Naga appear in Hindu scriptures, Buddhist canonical texts, Khmer royal genealogy, Thai river tradition, Balinese temple architecture, and Burmese agricultural ritual, making them the most geographically widespread supernatural guardians of material wealth in the history of human mythology. Nagaloka, the serpent realm described in the Mahabharata and the Puranas, occupies the space directly below the Earth's surface and extends downward through 7 subterranean levels of increasing splendor. Classical accounts specify that Nagaloka contains more gold, more precious gems, and more refined metalwork than exists in the entire human world above ground, all of it tended by Naga royalty who have no use for it personally, maintaining it as a function of their sovereign stewardship of the Earth's interior. Every mineral deposit humans have spent millennia extracting copper, silver, gold, iron was, in this cosmology, already owned and catalogued by beings who consented to its occasional removal when properly petitioned. Naga Panchami, the 5th day of the bright half of Shravan, falling in July or August, is the annual Hindu festival at which families across India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka offer milk, honey, turmeric, and lotus flowers to cobra nests, anthill formations where cobras shelter, and sculpted Naga figures at temple entrances. The offering is not made out of fear, but out of relationship maintenance. A formal acknowledgement that the Naga hold the soil's fertility in their coils, that underground water flows where Naga permit it to flow, and that a household that honors this stewardship will find its fields productive and its wells reliable. In a monsoon-dependent farming culture, groundwater management is not superstition. It is the entire margin between solvency and ruin. The Nagamani, the serpent gem, is the specific wealth artifact attributed to Naga royalty. A jewel of incomparable brilliance, the size of a pigeon's egg and luminous enough to illuminate a dark room, the Nagamani grows on the foreheads of the most ancient Naga during centuries of deep meditation. A mortal who obtains one gains, depending on the tradition, the ability to locate hidden treasure, command underground water sources, heal incurable illness, or survive any venom, the last of which was practical enough to make Nagamani hunting a documented occupation in medieval India. The Angkor Wat complex, the largest religious monument ever constructed, covering 162 hectares of Cambodian jungle, opens on every causeway with balustrades of 9-headed Naga in stone, the serpents rising from the earth to flank the royal approach. This is not decoration. In Khmer cosmology, the royal family descended from the union of a Brahmin and a Naga princess, and the legitimacy of the Khmer kingdom rested on this divine serpent lineage. Each night, the king retired to a tower to meet with a 9-headed Naga spirit whose continued cooperation ensured the kingdom's prosperity. If the king failed to appear, she withdrew her blessing. The kingdom eventually fell. In the rivers of northern Thailand and Laos, enormous Naga spirits are believed to inhabit the deep channels of the Mekong, one of Southeast Asia's most productive fisheries. Fishermen leave offerings before casting nets into known Naga territories, attributing abundant catches to Naga permission rather than technique or season. The Naga fireballs, balls of pink red light that rise silently from the Mekong surface on specific October nights, draw tens of thousands of pilgrims annually, interpreted as the visible breathing of the river's Naga as they surface to honor the end of Buddhist Lent. Scientists have proposed methane combustion. The pilgrims are not particularly interested in methane. Number 7. The Alicanto. It moves through the Atacama at night flightless, roughly the size of a large duck, its feathers glowing with a cold metallic light the color of whatever ore it has most recently consumed. Gold-feeding Alicantos glow warm amber yellow, silver-feeding ones glow blue-white, picking out rock formations and throwing strange shadows across the desert floor. Miners in the Chilean Andes have followed this light for centuries, stumbling through arroyos and creviced hillsides with hammering hearts, because what the Alicanto leads a man toward is the single most valuable thing in his world. An exposed mineral vein, extractable, real, and worth enough to change a family's circumstances for 3 generations. The creature feeds exclusively on metallic ore, locating deposits through a sensory apparatus the folklore makes no attempt to explain. It is a being built by the Atacama's mythology to represent something true about the desert. that it is saturated with mineral wealth, that the wealth is accessible to those who can find it, and that finding it requires following a light through a landscape that will kill you if you make a single serious error. The Atacama is the driest non-polar desert on Earth. In its core zones, no measurable rainfall has been recorded in living memory. Mountain passes in the mining districts rise above 4,000 meters. A man who follows an Alicanto into the dark without water, without landmarks, without the presence of mind to mark his path, is a man who will be found days later, stiff in a canyon. Other miners will attribute his death to the creature with the matter-of-fact acceptance of professionals familiar with an occupational hazard. The Alicanto knows it is being followed. This is the central operational fact of its mythology. It moves just fast enough that the pursuer cannot close the distance, leading him away from known paths, away from water, toward terrain where a misstep means a drop into a dry ravine in the dark. As distance from safety increases, the creature sometimes employs its most feared ability, shadow theft. A man who follows an Alicanto long enough finds, at a certain point, that his shadow has gone stolen, in the folklore's logic, leaving him without the directional reference that a shadow in moonlight provides. A man without a shadow in the Atacama night has no orientation, no ability to track his own position relative to the stars. He walks in circles until exhaustion takes him. Shadow theft is the folklore's precise metaphor for a specific cognitive reality. Miners who pursued mineral wealth too desperately, who followed the possibility of fortune further than rational risk assessment, lost the capacity to think clearly about where they were and what they were doing. The Alicanto did not need to harm them directly. It simply needed them to follow long enough for the desert to finish the work. 19th century Chilean folklore collectors documented the Alicanto systematically during the great silver and nitrate mining booms that transformed the northern provinces into some of the most economically productive and most lethal territory in South America. The folklore preserves, within its supernatural framework, the statistical truth that a small number of miners who followed Alicanto sightings came back at dawn with their coordinates intact. They had seen the glow, marked the rock formation, resisted the pull deeper into the dark, and returned in daylight to excavate an ore deposit that proved genuine. The men in these accounts became wealthy. The lesson the tradition draws is stated without sentimentality. The Alicanto rewards only those who refuse to follow it all the way. Number 8. The Jinn. Before the oil, before the trade routes, before the great empires built on frankincense and maritime silk Arabia had the Jinn, and the Jinn built things that empires never could. Created, as the Quran states in Surah Al-Rahman, from smokeless fire, the Jinn are not the bottled wish-granters of sanitized children's stories, but an entire order of supernatural beings parallel to humanity in intelligence and surpassing it in physical capacity. They argue, they worship, they rebel, they hold grudges across generations. The ones who entered into service agreements with humans could, in the right circumstances, make those humans wealthy beyond the combined resources of the richest contemporary empire. The Jinn divide into 5 orders, each with a distinct economic relationship to the human world. The Jann are minor desert dwellers whose wealth-generating capacity is modest. The Sila shapeshift convincingly enough to infiltrate merchant households for years. The Ghul haunt graveyards and bring only subtraction. The Merid control the weather systems that determine whether trading dhows reach port or sink in the Strait of Hormuz, the most consequential supernatural beings any maritime merchant could cultivate or antagonize. The Ifrit are the builders. Enormous, cunning, possessed of an industrial construction capacity that no human labor force could match. And it is the Ifrit who populate the great architectural legends of the Arabian world. Solomon Suleiman in Islamic tradition received from God a ring engraved with the divine name, granting him command over every order of jinn simultaneously. The economic output of this arrangement is documented in the Quran's Surah Saba and Surah An-Naml. Ifrit mining ore and cutting stone for the Temple of Jerusalem, constructing the Queen of Sheba's throne and transporting it from her kingdom to Solomon's court faster than a man could blink, working the copper mines of the Wadi Araba at a scale no human workforce of the era could replicate. When Solomon died, his jinn laborers still at work on a construction project did not discover he was dead until termites ate through the staff his body had been propped against. They had worked, unpaid, in his service for months after he was gone. The wealth his reign generated became the template against which every subsequent human ambition for prosperity measured itself. The 1001 Nights Alf Layla Wa Layla is the codified manual for jinn-human financial relationships, dressed as entertainment. The Fisherman's Tale of a Marid sealed in a brass bottle for 1800 years presents the essential risk calculation. A being who spent the first 5 centuries resolving to reward his liberator with kingdoms, the next 5 resolving to give him treasure, and the remaining 800 resolving to kill him instead. The fisherman survives through cleverness alone. The Knights consistently reaches the same conclusion. Jinn wealth extraction requires intelligence, not courage, and the wisest approach is to negotiate terms before the seal breaks. Iron is the original jinn containment technology, the metal that prevents jinn from manifesting their full power, which is why iron tools and iron weapons spread with such velocity across the ancient world once the jinn's weakness became culturally encoded knowledge. Every iron blade a human ever forged was, in the logic of jinn folklore, a ward against beings who can otherwise have done the work themselves and demanded payment in kind. The jinn's capacity to generate wealth was real in every tradition that documented it. The terms were simply never comfortable enough to accept without very careful reading. Number 9. The Bassa-Jan. Standing between 3 and 4 meters tall, covered from crown to foot in long dark hair that falls across his face and trails behind him through the mountain undergrowth, hands the size of millstones, feet that leave impressions half a meter deep in soft mountain soil, the Bassa-Jan, the wild lord of the forest in the oral tradition of the Basque people of northern Spain and southern France, looks exactly like the most dangerous thing in the Pyronian highlands. He is not. He is the reason the Basque people ate wheat instead of acorns, built mills instead of grinding stones, and worked iron instead of chipping flint. He is the creature who gave human civilization its 3 most transformative productive technologies: wheat cultivation, the saw, and the watermill, and whose gifts, whether freely offered or cleverly taken, reshaped the agricultural and industrial foundations of Western Europe. The wheat came first. In Basque oral tradition, the cultivation of grain was not a human invention. It was a Bassa-Jan practice, and his hidden mountain fields grew cereal crops in secret centuries before any human. Community understood that grass seeds could be planted deliberately and harvested reliably. A young man versions of the tale describe a shepherd, a hunter, a curious farmer's son found Bassa-Jan's fields and watched from concealment as a giant worked through the entire cultivation sequence from soil preparation to harvest, committing each step to memory. He carried the knowledge back to his community and planted the first human grain field the Basque tradition acknowledges. Bassa-Jan, in most versions, was neither fooled nor angered. Several accounts describe him as having left the field in a location the young man was likely to find. The saw came by closer observation still. Encountered resting beside a felled tree, Bassa-Jan carried a blade with teeth along its edge, serrated in the precise pattern of a chestnut leaf, which he had apparently studied and reproduced in metal. A shepherd who shared a meal with Bassa-Jan and sat near him for several hours committed the tooth pattern to memory, returned to his village, and fashioned a crude version in hammered iron. The tooth saw was not a human insight. It was a plagiarism, one that transformed construction capacity more completely than any other single tool until the steam engine. The mill followed by similar means. Bassa-Jan had constructed a water-powered grinding installation at a mountain stream, using stone wheels and a channel of running water to do continuously what human hand grinding required hours to accomplish intermittently. Humans found it, studied it, and built their own. The parallel with Prometheus the Titan, whose contact with humanity permanently elevated human capability, runs through this tradition without being stated. Civilization's most foundational tools did not emerge from human ingenuity alone, and the beings who possessed them first were not entirely unwilling to see them passed on. What distinguishes Bassa-Jan within the broader category of mythological wealth granters is his continued goodwill after the thefts. He did not chain himself to a rock or demand tribute. He continued, unprompted, to warn shepherds of approaching wolf packs and incoming mountain storms. Basque tradition records that when flocks under Bassa-Jan's unofficial protection passed his location on a mountain trail, the animals' bells rang spontaneously, his presence registering as sound in the metal, his acknowledgement of the relationship continuing without formal agreement or expectation of reciprocity. The Basque country became, by the medieval period, one of Europe's most sophisticated ironworking regions, producing anchors, tools, weapons, and ship fittings of exceptional quality centuries before any mechanical advantage was available. The Ferrerius, the traditional Baskwater-powered ironworks, were the direct technological descendants of the mill principle attributed to Basijan. The creature who looked like wild nature gave civilization its working blueprint. The hair over his face was the only part that looked like a monster. Number 10. The Rubizal. His name means turnip counter, and he hates it. The most powerful mountain spirit in Central European folklore, the lord of the Kar-Kanos range along the modern Czech-Polish border. Master of its notoriously violent weather, guardian of its mineral deposits, and the figure who has, across 9 centuries of documented tradition, made more Silesian miners and Bohemian merchants suddenly wealthy than any other supernatural patron in the region's history, goes through the world burdened by a name he acquired because a bored noblewoman tricked him into counting root vegetables. He has punished people for using it in his presence. He has never corrected it publicly, because Rubizal finds something instructive in a world that names its most fearsome mountain spirit after a turnip. He has no fixed form. On any given crossing of the Kar-Kanos, Rubizal might appear as a wandering Franciscan monk with a staff and an uncommonly gentle manner, a weathered miner with a headlamp already lit, or a white-bearded old man who falls into step beside a traveler without announcing himself. The Kar-Kanos range was already among Central Europe's most geographically volatile landscapes. Winter temperatures that dropped 40 degrees in an hour, avalanche conditions that formed without warning, summer fogs that closed visibility to 3 meters, and Rubizal's mood was the operating manual for these conditions. A clear day meant approval. A fast-moving storm meant someone had done something specific that required addressing. The merchant test appears throughout the Rubizal corpus in consistent form. A wealthy traveler enters the mountains laden with silver or trade goods. A humble stranger on the path asks to share a fire or a meal. The wealthy traveler refuses, sometimes with contempt. The stranger reveals himself as Rubizal, and the traveler's saddlebags are found to contain river stones where silver was packed, or the mountain path ahead has quietly rearranged itself into an extended circuit that will cost him 3 additional days of exposure. The version of the same traveler who shares his fire arrives in the valley to find his saddlebags heavier than he packed, containing ore samples that refine, upon assay, into silver of unexpected purity. The Countess Kunigunde story, codified by Johann Karl August Musaus in his Volksmarkender Deutschen, published between 1782 and 1786. A collection among the sources that shaped the Brothers Grimm is the foundational Rubizal text. A noblewoman, kidnapped to his mountain palace, its halls heated by geothermal vents, its floors covered in the pelts of animals that do not exist at lower altitudes, is offered anything she wishes in exchange for her affection. She asks for companions. Rubizal transforms turnips into copies of her friends. They wilt slowly, as turnips do. She asks him to count how many turnips remain in his fields, a task that absorbs his powers entirely, and escapes down the mountain on a horse he has left at her disposal. Before reaching the valley, a bag of dried herbs falls from her saddlebag. By the time she arrives home, the herbs have become gold coins of a denomination her accountant cannot identify, minted in no kingdom he has encountered. She lives well for the rest of her life, and Rubizal is given a name that will follow him forever, payment, in his tradition, that he considers fair. Silesian miners maintained a transactional relationship with Rubizal through the 16th and 17th centuries, when the Kar-Kanos were actively worked for silver, zinc, and coal. Food, tobacco, and carved wooden figures were left at mountain passes before descent into working shafts. Shaft collapse survivals the beam that held when it should have failed were attributed to his intervention. His image now appears on hiking trail markers throughout the Kar-Kanos National Park, on regional produce labels, and on the label of the area's most popular regional beer, watching every purchase with the same expression. Patient, quietly amused, waiting to see whether you will share your fire with a stranger on a cold mountain path. From Kitsune tending Japan's rice fields to a temperamental mountain spirit named after a root vegetable, these 10 creatures share one quality that no treasure map or investment thesis has ever honestly guaranteed. They never gave wealth away freely. In every tradition, on every continent, the mythology agreed fortune favors the observant, the patient, and the sincere. If you found this video worth your time, subscribe and leave a like, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from, because the folklore of prosperity is different everywhere, and we've barely begun.